opening up a public hearing on Senate Bill 667. And Mr. Rancid, can you give us an overview?
Chair Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, and members of the committee, Senate Bill 667 prohibits the governor from deploying the state militia for service in armed conflict or conduct of war unless the United States Congress passes a declaration of war or explicitly calls forth the state militia to execute United States law, suppress an insurrection, or repel an invasion.
And we have Senator Thatcher.
Yeah, well, I think
Senator Linthicum.
Yeah, Senator Linthicum is, I don't care who goes first. We haven't discussed this.
Yeah, it's fine. For the record, my name is Diane Linthicum, and I'm the state senator for District 28, which is home to the 173rd Fighter Wing, a unit of the Oregon Air National Guard stationed at Kingsley Field Air Base in Klamath Falls. Chair Manning and committee members, thank you for giving the Defend the Guard bill a hearing this afternoon. I had this morning. SB 667 is known as the Defend the Guard bill. This legislation would prohibit the deployment of Oregon's National Guard units into active combat without a formal declaration of war by Congress, as required by Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Defend the Guard legislation gives no impediment on the ability of the president or the governor to activate the National Guard under Title 10 or Title 32, respectively. This bill clearly defines the governor's authority to command the National Guard within Oregon. When Congress votes and approves a formal declaration of war as required by Article 1, Section 8, the National Guard will have the legal approval to perform combat operations beyond the borders of the United States and under the command of the President as outlined by Title 10 of the U.S. Constitution. This Defend the Guard bill emphasizes the importance of congressional approval before committing our young people to the trauma of foreign wars. The federal government has ignored this constitutional requirement for decades to the detriment of our service members. SB 667 presents us with the opportunity to save Oregon's National Guard service members from getting caught in a constitutional quagmire by requiring approval from our U.S. Congress. Thank you. Any questions?
I will stay up here because the chair prefers that members of the committee who have bills stay at the dais, so here I am. So 667, Senate Bill 667, does not change any existing federal law, rather it enforces it, because the goal of the bill is to uphold the Constitution, namely, as you heard, Article 1, Section 8, which gives Congress the authority to call upon the National Guard for armed conflicts. The need for this bill arises from the fact that Congress has not carried out their duty, constitutional duty, to since World War II. And that has led to, arguably, illegal deployments overseas, deaths, and endless wars. The governor is the commander-in-chief of the state National Guard until Congress exercises its authority by declaring war, which would then transfer the command to the president or commander-in-chief. Defend the Guard adds a legal layer of protection on the state level against misuse by the federal executive branch. Defend the Guard is a nonpartisan movement led by veterans nationwide who have sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution, and they're opposed to these costly, unconstitutional, and often unnecessary foreign conflicts. Currently, the Oregon National Guard is deployed to at least 3 war zones in the Middle East. Last year, our bases in Iraq and Syria came under attack more than 170 times. Of course, there's a lot of death and injury associated with that, and that includes our Guard members. The National Guard has multiple tasks, including helping state forces during natural disasters. In 2020, when we needed our Guardsmen to assist in the Columbia Gorge wildfire, their equipment was deployed thousands of miles away and not around to help with the state disaster. So the protection of the lives of our Guardsmen and women must be the priority, and it is our responsibility as a legislature. The Founding Fathers were very cautious about giving the executive branch the ability to initiate wars in order to prevent any abuse. That's why the Constitution explicitly authorizes Congress only to declare war.
Senator, you want to wait until?
Sure, I'll wait.
Okay. Representative Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, senators and roommates. I just wanted to say thanks so much for having me. My name is Alex Scarlatos. I represent House District 4, and I was in the National Guard for 5 years, did the Afghanistan deployment in 2014, 2015. And I just wanted to say on this bill, the National Guard is primarily meant to stay at home in Oregon. We are meant to defend the nation and to assist our state with natural disasters and anything else that they need. Ever since President Bush federalized the National Guard following 9/11, we have been deployed overseas with increasing frequency, more so even than active duty units. And if the active duty military needs more troops, then they should recruit more. They shouldn't use the National Guard as a supplement. I mean, everyone in the National Guard is happy to serve in whatever capacity. I had no objection to going to Afghanistan, aside from the fact that I maybe had moral reasons to think it was incorrect. We're all happy to serve. That's why we joined the National Guard. The point is, it's just being abused at this point. Again, Bush activated the National Guard after 9/11 following an attack on New York City. That was, can't even do the math, 24 years ago now, and the National Guard is still federalized and deployed. I just came here from my emergency management committee, and we always talk about the Cascadia subduction zone event and its threat to the state of Oregon. And like Senator Thatcher mentioned, our troops are currently deployed to Egypt and other places around the Middle East. If that were to happen right now today, we would have almost no National Guard inside the state of Oregon to assist with that emergency. And not to mention, our troops deployed to Egypt were deployed without medical supplies, personal IFACs, which is, I think, personally very offensive, considering that we're lending our citizens, our soldiers, our troops to the federal government. And when the state doesn't have ample supplies, which I think they should, the federal government still doesn't even take the opportunity to step up and give our troops the supplies that they need when they're deployed on behalf of the federal government. For all of those reasons, I would urge you to support this bill, and I would be happy to carry it in the House. Thank you.
Senator Brock Smith.
Thank you, and thank you all for Senator Linthicum and Senator Thatcher, and I know Representative Scarlatos, you'll sign on as soon as we can get this bill over to you. My one question, though, is, and you might have answered it, but is the National Guard still available for domestic issues? So if there is a need in, let's say, Hurricane Helene that occurred, would we still be able to utilize our National Guard troops here in the United States?
If this bill is passed, is that what
Yes.
you mean? Alex, do you know?
I believe that's true. I think the good Senator Linthicum mentioned that depending on the title that they're activated under, yes, it should still be.
Okay, good. Because we might need National Guard troops, of course, from other states to assist us with the Cascadia if and when it does happen. And so I just want to make sure that I fully agree and am hitting sponsor as we speak on the piece of legislation. But I just want to make sure that we can still utilize our National Guard troops from our 50 states domestically if we need them. So, thank you.
So just when you were activated, the governor didn't send you there. It was under the orders of the president, right?
Correct.
Title 10.
Yes.
Okay, so that is one of the questions that I really need to understand, because what this bill says is that the governor should not send National Guardsmen into battle, and the governor doesn't have that authority. That authority lies solely with the President of the United States. There are two parts. Title 10, which is federalized, which President Bush did at the time, and I was in Puerto Rico at the time when it happened. So, and Title 32 is when the governor activates National Guardsmen to handle domestic issues here. with the authority of the president. So the president has authority in both cases, but the governor has no authority to send any National Guardsmen into battle. That's solely responsible with the president of the United States. And any war is declared by Congress. So I'm a little bit kind of confused. Perhaps the bill, well, we'll listen to everybody else. But I do want to thank you. Thank you for your sacrifices.
I could speak to that,
Please.
if you don't mind. So that is true. This is a bill, and that would be correct. There might be some edits that we would need to make. I am running a bill on the House side that answers that exact question, and it is simply a resolution to Congress to change that so that, again, we're not going over the governor's head.
Okay. I'd like to work with you more on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have a list of folks here. Folks, I'm going to ask that you do 3 minutes because we are going to be running out of time and members going to have to be going to other committees. So let's start off with, we got one remote here. Dan Hedelman, remote? Mr. Hedelman there?
He is online, yes.
There he is.
Chair Manning.
Good afternoon, sir. Please state your name and begin your testimony.
Great, thank you very much. To the members of the Senate Committee, my name is Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm with the group Peace and Justice Works. We've been around since 1992. Beginning in 2004, we sent a letter nearly every year to the various governors of Oregon, urging them not to send our National Guard to undeclared war zones. We've picked up signatures from organizations around the state over the years, including veterans organizations. In 2008 to 2009, we helped gather statewide support for a resolution to keep Oregon's Guard in Oregon, which did not receive enough votes to pass. We want to ensure the Guard stays home to help fight wildfires, conduct search and rescue missions, and handle unexpected events such as setting up temporary medical facilities for the coronavirus pandemic. We believe the Guard should only be deployed overseas when there's a congressional declaration of war as required by the Constitution and this bill. Late last year, Oregon's Guard was sent to Iraq, where the authorization for use of military force passed in 2002 was to engage in military action against the deposed government of Saddam Hussein, and Syria, a country whose government has also been deposed, but to which Congress never issued an authorization for war. So we support the bill's Clause 2 and 2A being added to state statute. We are concerned, however, about the inclusion of proposed Clause 2B, outlining other constitutionally authorized reasons to deploy the Guard. While Congress might ask Oregonians to head to the Mexican border because migration has been referred to as an invasion, that's not an appropriate use of the military. The Constitution envisions people are trying to come into the country and conquer territory on behalf of a foreign power, not those fleeing oppression or poverty and seeking better lives. Similarly, there are references to people who took to the streets for racial justice in Portland as a rebellion. But again, they were not seeking to overthrow the government. Remember, it was members of the National Guard who took the lives of people protesting the Vietnam War at Kent State University in 1970. If the clause must remain, it might say, takes official lawful action as authorized by Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the United States Constitution. That's the approach taken in a Guard Home bill currently in the Maine legislature. We only recently found out about the existence of the bill, so we sent our testimony, written testimony this morning, and we had to kind of cobble ours together over the course of a week, but we appreciate the effort to return decisions about making war to the legislative branch as required by the Constitution. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Okay, so let's go with, I have two more that are remote. Annie Callan?
Hi, this is Annie Kalin. So let's see, I don't know why my camera's not working, but that's okay. So members of the committee, thank you for being here and listening to our testimony today. My name's Annie Kalin and I live in Portland. I'm the chair of the Libertarian Party of Multnomah County, and we've made a resolution in support of this bill, SB 667, Defend the Guard. We submitted this resolution in writing, but I'll go ahead and summarize the main points. as has been said earlier today, the United States Congress abdicated its responsibilities in 2001 when they passed a vague and general authorization for use of military force, and that granted then President Bush broad abilities to conduct military action after September 11th. We believe that the authors of the Constitution of the United States recognize the importance of the state's sovereign authority over the militia to remain outside the chain of command of armies raised by the United States. This is an essential check and balance on military tyranny. The Oregon Guard has been sorely needed at home to help prevent, control things like natural disasters and defending the freedoms, privileges, and immunities of the citizens of this state. More specifically, in 2020, there were 6 Oregon Guard Chinook helicopters that were sent to a mission in Afghanistan. And this is a time when, fires were raging all over Oregon. And if they had been here, they could have helped to put out those fires. In 2024, the Oregon National Guard 2nd Battalion, 218th Field Artillery Regiment was mobilized as part of the Task Force Defender in the Middle East. And this was not authorized by the U.S. Congress as an act of war. So for this reasons, the Libertarian Party of Multnomah County endorses and supports SB 667 in this legislative session. It would specifically ban the militia from being deployed by the governor to armed conflict. It's narrowly restricted to armed conflict or war. It doesn't prevent the National Guard from performing its other needed functions. And just to speak personally, for my own feelings, I was in my early 20s when George W. Bush said that the war in Iraq would be swift and we would secure certain victory in a very short period of time. And I'm now in my mid-40s and we are still embroiled in a collection of related wars that have never stopped. So this harms the people in those countries, and it also harms the servicemen and women who are sent there. So I encourage you to put this forward, and I appreciate you listening today. Thank you.
Thank you. Marion Kaufman.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? My camera is also disabled on the call.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee, my name is Marion Kaufman, and I reside in unincorporated Clackamas County. I'm here representing only myself today. The decision to deploy our state's guard to foreign combat zones is a very serious matter. Not only does this put the lives of Oregonian troops at risk, but it also depletes the resources available for responding at home, as others have mentioned, including that for disasters such as earthquakes and wildland fires. Due to the gravity of such a decision, this power is limited by the constitutional requirement that Congress must first deliberate over the merits of an official war declaration. Just like a responsible person might enact multi-factor authentication on their bank account, regardless of how annoying it is to enter the extra codes. Senate Bill 667 simply requires that our elected representatives act responsibly and carefully in the matter of foreign combat deployments. It has no effect on deployments relating to disaster response or training missions, even overseas training missions, despite what opposition testimony may imply. Checks and balances may be inconvenient, but they are necessary, and I urge you to support this bill today. Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last of our remote here. Bivens, Munson, and Sanders. Good afternoon. You can come forward.
I can go. This will be very
Yes.
brief. I encourage you to vote.
Your
this.
name, please.
I'm Marvin Sanis. I live at 640 15th Street Northeast in Salem, Oregon. I want to encourage you to vote favorably on this. So this issue needs a wider discussion, and voting this favorably would provide a wider discussion for this issue. Thank you.
I'm Julie Bivens. I live in Cresswell, and I'm here to voice my support for this bill. I think that it's really kind of should be unnecessary because the Constitution spells out quite clearly how our National Guard should be used. They have been basically the victims of bankers' wars, and every war is a bankers' war. And a lot of these, we can't even call wars because they haven't been declared. They're conflicts, they're whatever you want to call them. And our Guard never should have been there. Like other people have mentioned, our 2020 fires that raged through Oregon, we had no National Guard to help. The helicopters were in the Middle East. And I think even the recent disaster in North Carolina should point out why Oregon should do things the way they are written. Because 2 days after that disaster happened, they sent their National Guard to Syria. And these things are not how the Guard is meant to be used. The Constitution states it clearly. We need to follow the Constitution, and if we can't get people to do that, then I guess we have to spell it out more clearly in these other laws. I don't know why. We should be doing the right thing. That's all.
Good afternoon, Chair Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, and committee members. My name is Anna Munson, and I'm here in support of SB 667. I want to bring a different perspective. I'm the wife of a 100% disabled Vietnam vet. We have been married 40 years, and I want you to know that when anyone is in a combat zone, the consequences of that tour may not be visible for many years, but they do eventually show up. This bill requires that Oregon Guard troops are sent to areas that are considered combat zones. It requires a declaration of war from our Congress. I want you to know that when these men and women come back, the long-term conditions that deployment has ramifications not only to the veteran, but to their families, immediate and extended. For me, my husband has multiple heart conditions and procedures. He is an insulin-dependent diabetic with high blood pressure and comorbidities, and now uses a scooter for mobility, all complications of Agent Orange. We send our troops to war-torn countries. We expose them to a large variety of risks that become real later. I ask you to remember that our leaders, and our leaders to remember what happens to them not only affects the individual soldier, but also their loved ones. I and my family support my husband and are proud he served his country and community. Asking the United States Congress to make a declaration of war before we send the militia of this state to support an armed conflict is what our forefathers codified in the Constitution. But I ask that you support not because it is a law, but because we need to remember that we're sending our sons, daughters, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers, aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and more. These are people, real people, who have chosen to serve in Oregon's National Guard. We are sending them to dangerous situations that will affect them and all those around them. To know that our leaders have considered and taken official action on the conflict is not too much to ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for the panel? First, before you leave, I want you to know that I do understand the sentiments that you express and the sacrifices. So when I go out, I don't thank veterans for their service. I thank them for their sacrifices, as you have just clearly articulated right here. I wish your husband well. I hope that he's getting all of the that he earned.
Thank you.
These are benefits that are earned through blood, sweat, and tears, and it takes a toll on the body for years to come. Sometimes you can't see the scars, and as you alluded to, the family that it also impacts. I talk about that very frequently as well. So thank you again for your sacrifices, and my prayers are with you and your husband, as with all veterans that are out there suffering similar. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next panel, Falls, Bussey, and Stagenborg. Dr. Stagenborg. State your name, please, and begin your testimony.
My name's Chuck Fall, and I'm from Beaverton, Portland metro area. I'm the chief proponent for a Green Liberty Caucus. It's a chapter in the Pacific Green Party, and we support passage of Defend the Guard, Senate Bill 667. As a matter of principle, the Green Party is opposed to militarism. We support peace, and we oppose American hegemony abroad, and we seek to reform the national security state agencies. We respect, of course, the right of our nation to defend itself from foreign adversaries. The U.S. Constitution enshrines the power to declare war only to Congress, and Senate Bill 667 would prevent the Oregon National Guard from being deployed when war has not formally been declared. Congress has not declared war since World War II, but has since authorized the president to send troops overseas in the name of national security. This is unconstitutional, in our opinion, on the simple ground that a military operation that looks like a war, acts like a war, and functions like a war is a matter for Congress to declare. If Congress wants Oregon National Guard troops to be deployed overseas in a military action, then Congress needs to do what the Constitution says to do, formally declare war. Otherwise, the Guard should stay home. Since September 11th, 2001, the United States has dedicated 20-plus years of undeclared war in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya, Syria, and other places as a way of establishing American hegemony. This has been conducted on the backs of the National State Guard, State National Guard. Senate Bill 667, Defend the Guard, would prevent Oregon troops from being used to advance unjust wars. It would protect Oregonians from being used as fodder in wars of aggression that only benefit the plutocratic power structure, the power elite, to use the term from C. Wright Mills. President Eisenhower warned the nation about the military-industrial complex. Sadly, Congress has done nothing to counter the influence, and so now today is left to Oregon legislators to set the record straight that the Oregon National Guard will not be played as a pawn in American national security operations abroad. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir?
Chair Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, and members of the committee, thanks for having me here. I'm here to testify in support of 667. I'm a veteran. I'm a retired VA psychiatrist, and I took an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Could you put your name?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, it's Dr. Rick Stagenborg. I live in Albany. I took that oath, and it doesn't have an expiration date. The Constitution is under threat every time we send troops into combat without a declaration of war, be they National Guard or otherwise. And as has been pointed out repeatedly, we're doing it constantly. This is a direct threat to the Constitution and to democracy itself. As Madison warned, this is why it was put into the hands of Congress, who is supposed to debate these things, and it hasn't debated. So you ask Senator Manning how the governor can contravene an order of the president. Well, if you're in the military, you're expected to not obey illegal orders. And the governor has also taken an oath to defend the Constitution. Now, there are a lot of cases where there's been dubious claims of local and state authorities having the power to ignore federal orders, and I understand where those come from. This is a great example of why people think that way. This is a very clear example of a violation of the Constitution that we all have a duty to uphold, but particularly members of the legislature who've also taken that oath, as well as members of the military. And I can also vouch, in my experience, personally as well as a VA psychiatrist, about the consequences of war to people who serve. And I don't think that we should be sending our sons and daughters into combat on the say-so of politicians who may not be motivated by the best interests of the United States. National interests are not simply defined as the interests of the international corporations that can afford to pay for the election of our national officials. We have to assert our own personal authority as well as our legal authority to refuse illegal orders.
Thank you, Doctor. Questions for the, do we have Bussey, Thomas Bussey? Not here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last two, what is it, Pulju and Tair? Your name, please, and begin.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. My name is Dan Pulyu. I am a resident of Eugene. I have lived in Oregon for 35 years. I was the Pacific Green Party candidate for U.S. Senate in 2022, and I'm a co-director of Anti-War Oregon. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Vice Chair and other committee members for considering this bill, which I strongly support. I'm going to say something a bit different than has been said so far with a bit of statistics. Setting a high standard for deployment of our Guard forces is, in fact, a matter of national security. National security was the ironic pretext for overextending our country's military 2 decades ago in Iraq and Afghanistan. By 2008, years after George W. Bush first declared mission accomplished in Iraq, these deployments had escalated to dangerously high levels. Now here's the statistics. According to a report by Amy Belasco of the Congressional Research Service, at their peak in 2008, fully 26% of active duty U.S. Army personnel were deployed in Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan. And when considering units either training up for or recovering from deployments, this number, the number affected by these operations was about double the number currently deployed. That would mean about half, leaving only half of the active duty Army available to focus on defense of our homeland itself. Now, this context lets us understand why fully 11% of personnel deployed in 2008 to these two operations were from either Army or Air National Guard units. The Pentagon had bit off more than it could chew, and it brought in reserves and territorial defense units to compensate. Was that advisable? I think most Americans now agree much later that we have gained little or nothing from these wars. Afghanistan is once again controlled by the so-called Taliban. Iraq suffered chronic insurgencies over many years by Al-Qaeda and Islamic State, and now Syria is controlled by an Al-Qaeda derivative militia. Knowing this result, we should reevaluate whether it was worth the risk. Now, when Congress authorized these operations, did it fully consider the long-term consequences, including the likelihood of overextending the military at the expense of homeland defense? I believe that it did not. It was more interested in politics. Congress avoids formal declarations of war to evade its own due diligence and accountability. I believe that for the security of our nation, we must make Congress duly diligent and accountable. Requiring a formal declaration will help us do that. Now, I'd like to briefly comment on the exchange between you, Mr. Chairman, and Alex Carlatos. I believe the revival of these bills and of this movement nationwide has come at an opportune and very necessary time when this is something that needs to happen, because we have come to the realization that the federal government has been acting unlawfully. So, to me, what this is about is the states standing up and telling the federal government that it will not, that they will resist, that we will resist them taking these unlawful actions. I understand that the bill may need to be edited, amended, and I hope that it does succeed in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, thank you for presenting this bill. I would like to start.
Your name?
Oh, sorry. My name is Ibra Teher. I am from Eugene. I believe I'm actually in your district. I believe I met with all of you or your staff, and we talked about this bill previously. and I got a really positive feedback from all of you. So thank you so much for scheduling this hearing. Senator Manning, Senator Meek, thank you for sacrifice and services. We appreciate that. This bill, 667, is known as the Defend the Guard bill. It's a model legislation that is being presented nationwide. It is a movement led by veterans who saw the horrors of the war. If this bill does not discuss a law that gets people killed, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be talking about it, but unfortunately, it does. The people, our guardsmen, are being deployed unconstitutionally, continuously, to wars that we don't know what their mission is. Ill-defined mission, unconstitutional practices led to the abuse of this honorable line of service. When we talk about this bill, we're not talking about changing any law. It's already the law. It seems redundant, but because it's being neglected and violated, we want to add a protection layer, a state protection layer to combat this practice. Actually, when we talk about this practice, we're talking about unlawful practice. So Title 10, when they use it to act, when the president uses it to activate the National Guard, he has no authority to do it unless there's a war. And the war happens only when Congress declares it. So all of this practice is not constitutional. How do we know that? By Title 10 of the U.S. Code, by Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Again, this costs a lot of lives. The founding fathers, when they put it in the Constitution, they had a vision. They wanted to prevent the abuse. And guess what happened? For 70 years, what they wanted to be put in the Constitution to protect our troops was neglected. I urge you to support it. And if you have any questions, please do.
Okay, questions for the panel?
No, Chair Manning, not necessarily a question for the panel, but just acknowledgement and a recognition of appreciation for the both the sponsors and the folks that came forward today, because this truly is a fundamental issue that Congress has not been holding up to their responsibility, and we have been sending troops, including my father back in Vietnam. He served 2 terms in Vietnam. It was not even declared war. And so I have a nephew that served several terms in Iraq, received the Purple Heart, and we're sending, and I have folks and neighbors and friends from my community that were overseas as National Guard and saw a lot of hell there. And I think this is an opportunity for states, and including Oregon, to maybe send a message that in order for a president to send our troops, even our active duty, to war or to fight, that we should have declared a war. And I think we need to get back to basics and fundamentals, make sure that we're following the Constitution at all levels, at all fundamental levels in every article. So thank you for bringing this forward, and appreciate looking and making sure we do this right.
Can I add like a small one? So this bill is being supported in a bipartisan fashion, actually. You've seen today people from the Democratic Party, from Progressive, from the Green Party, from the Republican Party, and from non-affiliated people. Senator Paul endorsed this bill. The ACLU of West Virginia, Montana, the American Legion, many veterans. It does not have anything to do with partisan policies. They support this bill because it's not only the Constitution, it's upholding the Constitution, because the cost of neglecting this law is very high.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else that would like to provide testimony? Sir? State your name and please begin.
Yes. My name is Will Hobson, and I am the Vice Chair of the Libertarian Party of Oregon. Thank you, members of the committee, for holding this hearing today. Fellow Oregonians, as someone who was born and raised here, I love this place, as do many people who move here. If I had to prioritize a place on earth, it would be here. That fundamental principle is what drives me to speak to you today. We simply must reevaluate our priorities if Oregon is to thrive. Decades of overseas wars have not served our nation. While corporate media has done its level best to hide and mask the graphic violence, they cannot hide our homeless veterans in wheelchairs panhandling on the exit ramp, or the increases of everyday prices that come from our out-of-control spending on dysfunctional military hardware, or our worn-out bridges and roads. If you do one thing with your time and money, by logic, you cannot do something else with that time and money. That is how time and money works. We must prioritize. Our National Guard has priorities here at home. Wildfire remediation and suppression are an obvious one. During the devastating 2020 wildfire season, which I believe was brought up earlier, we had a National Guard Chinook helicopters deployed in the now defunct mission in Afghanistan. Just recently, we have Oregon National Guard deployed in active combat zones in eastern Syria, as well as other places in the Middle East. Was Afghanistan a bigger priority than Oregon? Is Syria? These deployments have massive costs and money and lives. I simply do not believe that the political powers in Washington, D.C. have Oregon and Oregonians' best interests in mind. Why would they? For this reason, we need to put up boundaries on when we lend our most capable men and women to a collective problem faced by the nation. If members of Congress cannot come together and take personal political responsibility for declaring war, then the conflict isn't important enough to be worth risking the lives of our troops, and no amount of federal funding should be worth that sacrifice. Let's exert some independence from DC and fly with our own wings. Make Oregon the first in the nation to pass the Defend the Guard Act with SB 667. Bring the troops home. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair Manning, Vice Chair Thatcher, and Senator Meek, I'll always remember your participation in the ceremony of the Vietnam Memorial. Every time I walk by there, thank you. Just real briefly, I support my name, Tim Cowan. You'd think I'd get that, wouldn't you? It seems like there's two parts to the bill. One, about the president and Congress's responsibility under the Constitution. The second involves the governor. The one thing that I was concerned about reading that is I would love this to go national, and I'm afraid that the reference to the governor and what she can do is going to detract from that. That was the first thing that happened when I read through that, and I wrote a whole bunch of notes down here about the governor's role and what she can do and so on. Because one of the things that you'll find out about the National Guard, it was created because it was a cheaper way to have a military. You didn't have to have a base. You didn't have to have all the, the facilities and places for the family because they're employed and they live in the state. And they can be activated right away, and it's a cheap way to have equipment. For example, the Air National Guard and their role in the Pacific Defense. So that's going to be an issue that will have to be addressed. And I guess because the lateness and so on, and everybody's testifying and so on, I would like to suggest that two things. One, the National Guard, I was kind of expecting them to be here and help fill in some of the blanks and questions that people would have about the role of the National Guard now. Because when we activated the 41st Infantry Brigade and sent them to Kosovo, that was based like on a treaty. It was an understanding. There are alliances like that between the National Guard and foreign militaries. When you ship equipment, the Oregon National Guard will help with training and answering questions and that type of stuff. So that all fits into it. And NATO and UN and those type of things. There's a lot of ways that you can get the military involved without a declaration of war. So I'm through, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. We're running over, but I do want to put this on the record so that people will really understand. When it's mobilized or activated under Title 10 United States Code, the Guard is directed by the President to report for active duty in an official capacity. They are activated by federal active duty military service. When federal service, Guard personnel typically participate in military operations and are entitled to the same pay and benefits and legal protections as active duty. Under activation of Title 32, United States Guard means that the governor can request through the direction of the president to activate or mobilize guardsmen for issues here in the state. The governor does not send troops into combat. That is ordered by the President of the United States. One thing we all agree upon, Congress has failed to do its job. Congress declares war. The President have mobilized our National Guard. This section in here that refers to the governor, as you indicated, is a distraction. It does nothing. It solves nothing because the governor has no authority to send any troops into combat. The governor has control over the National Guard here locally. Fires, security, rescue, things like that in the state. But the governor does not have the authority to send anybody into combat. So there's some work on this bill. I think that Representative Scarlata, I believe he indicated that he's working on a resolution to go to Congress, to direct Congress or ask Congress to do their job. That's something that I would be willing to look at. I agree with the sentiments, but some of the things in this bill are inaccurate. So thank you all for your time. And what do we got coming up?
Yeah, close the public hearing.
Closing the public hearing on Senate Bill 667.